Welcome to Draw 4, where I draw 4 topics with the best Flesh and Blood players in the community. Today our guest is Brodie Spurlock. We are talking about Brodie's year in Flesh and Blood and what you can learn from his takeover to take away for the next year yourself. Brodie, welcome to the show.
Hey Alex, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to dive into my 2023 and some things I've learned to apply in 2024.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about this now because we were spending some time together this year throughout the month, and we also talked a lot on the channel already. So I'm super stoked to do this like review kind of thing with you and then work out the takeaways, not only for yourself, but then also for the viewers.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to kind of look back at the whole year. It's been sort of nonstop, especially recently, just going to event after event and taking a second to look back and reflect on all the events and kind of what I've learned from them will be pretty cool.
Yeah, you are known as kind of like the wonder kid in Flesh and Blood. And some people were even saying that the success you have is mostly based on the time you have available. But we will see if that is really true in the review today. So let's just start talking about your career that you had this year in Flesh and Blood and start with like, how many tournaments did you actually play?
So in total, counting everything tier 2 and above, I played 61 tournaments.
Wow, that's massive. Wow. So how was it like? You were on the go nearly always.
Yeah, it was a lot. Earlier in the year, it was a little bit more spread out. I had some breaks in between. It's a ton of fun. Like, there's, for me, nothing else in the world that I enjoy doing as much as playing Flesh and Blood tournaments. That's why I make it such a high priority to go to as many as I can. And every week that I know I have a tournament coming up that weekend, I'm more excited, more motivated. I have something to prepare for and look forward to. And it is sometimes nice to have off weeks just because there's so much competing. But I don't know for sure what my ideal year would look like as far as the number of weekends that have tournaments, but it's somewhere close to all of them. Like if there was one every weekend, I would try to go. And that's kind of how the end of this year was. For October, November, and December, I played 11 weeks straight of traveling tournaments, just going all over. Some of them were like international and then back to the States and then international again. The travel itself did get really exhausting. And it was a lot, but the tournaments are so much fun, and it was really cool to kind of marathon them like that and see how I was performing and kind of progressing over that time. Even just like in that chunk of 11 weeks, I learned some things.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in for sure, but not only to consume for yourself or the experience that you had, but also something for your time schedule and also for the endurance you need to have for those things.
Yeah, I think, having a lot of free time helps. I am homeschooled, so being able to be really flexible with my school schedule and often cram it into like the middle of the week and just do longer school days on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, that allows me to travel more and travel at all on Monday and Friday. That's really nice. And also, I think just still being like in my younger years of life, I guess helps with like the energy and not burning out of like constantly going and, being on airplanes and not getting quite as much sleep as normal because of the travel and the jet lag.
But it's not like you are just like going there and then see what happens. You really have a schedule and you're planning ahead for those things to happen.
Yeah, especially with international trips, I try to get there early for 2 reasons. The first is just jet lag. I want to ideally have a couple days to adjust, so by the time the tournament rolls around, getting up at the time it starts feels normal. And then also, especially for majors like Worlds, I want to be in town in time to test in person with people. Like this year for Worlds, we had a team Airbnb and we did drafts and then also just like in-person CC grinding. And that kind of stuff is always really helpful.
Yeah, definitely it helps for you having a more flexible schedule. But what is a key takeaway from all this? Like, how is it called in English? The 11 weeks are kind of like a marathon, right? You need to really have like so much endurance to go through that time. And what are some things that you learned this year and having so many tournaments played that also other players that have not as many time as you can then take away with?
I think I've learned so much related to the game and like my play, but as far as like actual just physical stuff, like being able to play that many in a row and like have the endurance to still focus and ideally perform well at the tournaments. I think that exercise is a really big thing I've been trying to prioritize. Even though exercise itself is tiring, I think in the long run, it actually like helps you stay more energized and get less exhausted long term, even though it like wears you out short term. I think the more I exercise and make a priority to just stay active constantly, that helps me to stay really like just like focused and not make silly mistakes in the tournaments, and keeps me going for longer. Like that was a big priority for me just now in the 11 weeks, trying to go for runs, and even when I was out of town, finding ways to just get some movement. I think it helps a lot.
So we will jump into the takeaways that you are planning ahead for next year then later on, but let's talk about from those tournaments that you had. It was 61. So how many of those did you actually win?
I got first place at 18 of those.
And many of those were also battle hardens, right? You are kind of known like for taking over all the battle hardens.
Yeah, the majority of those 61 were battle hardens and PTI events, which normally go hand in hand. In a given weekend, there will be a battle harden on Saturday into a PTI event on Sunday.
So let's talk a little bit in more detail about how your tournament rankings were actually going. So tell us more about your top 8s, your top 16s, and then also considering top 32s, because in tier 3, that also means that you are getting a PTI for those.
Yeah, so in tier 3 and above, I had 2 calling top 32s as well as 2 calling top 16s, and then finally got my first calling top 8 in Taipei this year. And then I also made the top 32 at Worlds, which, like you mentioned, that's good for a PTI. And that was the same I finished at Worlds last year. I had very similar results at the 2, finished 26th this time. And then my biggest accomplishment this year was making top 8 at Pro Tour Baltimore, which is also when I got to spend a lot of time with you, and we had that really cool documentary on kind of the team's journey at Pro Tour Baltimore. If anyone hasn't seen that, it's on Alex's channel. It turned out really well. You did a really good job on that.
Thank you so much, Brodie. It was an amazing time for sure. I will remember this one for so long. But let's dive a little bit more into this achievement that you had this year, because I think so many people are looking at the top 8, top 16 maybe, and then like the flutter goes around. And you're mentioning it because it's really important, getting the PTI. Tell us more about like what are you actually doing with all these PTIs that you are earning, because I think also that not only goes into being able to attend at the tournaments, but then also affording to go to those tournaments, right?
Yeah, so right now, I'm just keeping the PTIs that I've earned banked. And I think that currently I have no plans to slow down with my Flesh and Blood playing. I want to play even more next year than I did this year. But if I ever get to a point in life where I can't play as much constantly and I can only go to a select few events each year, I want to have these PTIs so that I'm able to not play all the time, but still make it to, let's say, like the 2 Pro Tours and Worlds and Nats as well, ideally. So like 4 PTIs a year. If I ever have less time to spend on Flesh and Blood, I am just trying to kind of build a bank up for that so that I can still compete in majors. And then at some point, I might also sell the PTIs to, just like fund more trips, and just that it's kind of like an added prize amount to like any cash tournaments you do well in. You get, the set amount that's actually listed plus the gold foil, and then PTI is just a third way to make those more profitable.
Yeah, I think PTIs, for those players who are not familiar with that concept, is a way to, like you said, to really get a little bit back from the travel that you had, or then if you want to attend another big event in the future. But let's dive into the cost maybe a little bit later on again, and now focus on what was the most shaping tournament this year for you.
I think the most shaping tournament for me this year was US Nats. It was the major event that I did the worst in this year. It was split between Classic Constructed and Monarch Draft, and I did very well in Classic Constructed, but I did not so well in Monarch Draft, and that was the biggest takeaway for me. I feel like in the weeks and months leading up, I didn't get enough Monarch Draft practice. I needed to prioritize spending more time on it, learning about the different heroes, just mostly just jamming more total drafts, whether it's in person or online. I think I just didn't have enough experience with the format. And though I did practice it a fair bit, I ran into spots in my games at Nats where several more reps with each hero probably would have led to me making the right choice, and I made the wrong one, and that led to a not great performance at Nationals. And moving into Worlds with Bright Lights format, I really prioritized spending a lot of time on Limited, putting Limited first, and just getting as many drafts in as possible, especially in-person ones wherever I could manage it. Like at a lot of the traveling events that I was going to, we would like get draft pods going on the side. At Calling Melbourne, like in the evenings, we did I think 2 or 3 drafts throughout the weekend, just here and there. That really adds up. So I think that was the biggest thing. I just, ever since US Nats, Limited became an enormous priority for me. And I kind of recognized, like, if I don't put the time in for draft, it's going to punish me in these majors. And so that's something that I'm making a big priority for next year as well. I really want to make sure I'm putting Limited first, especially at least the way the format structure was for events this year. CC tends to be a lot more common in the traveling tournaments like Battle Hardens and whatnot. So I automatically get more CC practice because of those. So I need to spend my own free time when I'm preparing, probably overcompensating for draft a little bit, because then it ends up evening out given how much I'm playing CC at these weekend tournaments. So yeah, mostly just I need to focus on draft, and that's a big priority for me moving forward.
So then let's dive more into these learnings that you had this year, because as you said, it is a learning for you. Like, how much percentage are you taking on with CC and with drafting? But what is really the most important thing out of all those learnings that you had in the year?
I think the number one thing that I feel like I really made progress in this year is finally mastering keeping my emotions under control when I'm playing, and just focusing on the current game and enjoying the process of like trying to find the right lines and doing my best to win the game, just because I love Flesh and Blood. And like even at high stakes, trying to get myself in the mindset of I'm playing because I love Flesh and Blood, not I'm playing because there are big prizes on the line. Trying to just completely put the stakes out of my mind, I think that really helps me play better. And the best trick that I have found when I'm starting to feel the pressure is to try to just pretend I'm a spectator of the game, and just like from an objective viewpoint, like, this guy's got, XYZ in his hand. What's the best play here? If I was him, I think I would do that. Okay, great. I am him. I'm going to do that. Like, just trying to, in my mind, put myself out of the game, pretend that I'm not a player at all, but I'm just like observing what's going on, and then thinking about like, what is the best play, and just trying to completely detach myself from it. I think that helps me get back into focusing on just the game itself and not what's at stake if I win or lose.
I think the way that I got to know you really reflects that, because you were always in every situation so down to earth, and you're always relying on all the values that you bring when going to the tournaments and being there with your friends. You already mentioned the Team Wolfpack. Let's dive deeper into your experience and talk about a moment that shaped you as a player this year.
I think one particular moment that was really shaping for me was in the World Championship just a few weeks ago. In round 9, we were playing the second draft pod, and at this point in the tournament, I was X1. It was during day 2, and I played a draft game where I was Max, my opponent was Teklevasen. They had a lot more cards in deck than me by the end of the game, but I had a line to win the game where all I needed to do was boost 1 attack and lose my Hyperdriver because of that. And then because my Hyperdriver died, I was going to play a blue Torque Tuned with Overpower, and that would be enough to deal the last point of damage to my opponent. And I made a very silly punt where I started my turn with Recharge, and the moment I put the Recharge on the table, I realized it was going to tick my Hyperdriver up to 2, and because of that, the driver could no longer die, and the Torque Tuned wouldn't be on. And there was no saving it at that point, because I was low enough that I couldn't give the Teklo any more time. There was no other way to get an item to die that turn, and it was pretty much just doomed. And that was a little bit of like a wake-up call for me, having a game that I had locked up on board, assuming my opponent didn't have a block card, which he didn't, and then punting it away at the very end. especially in a tournament that's such a big deal to me, like the World Championship. What's really interesting is that last year in 2022, I also made a very silly punt in round 9 of the World Championship in a draft game that lost me a game that I was winning. And when that happened last year in 2022, I always have takeaways from these losses. I try to always figure out what went wrong and what I can do to make that not happen next time. And it was kind of a difficult one for me in 2022. I was like, that was a very silly mistake. I knew that that was not correct, or I should have known, at least given the information I had. I definitely should have known that play wasn't correct. What caused me to make it? I just had a lapse in judgment for a second, and then physically committed to an action, and then a couple seconds later realized it was silly, but it was already locked in. How do I stop that from happening? And my answer to that question was prioritize getting myself in a better physical state and physical mental state, but basically just like more alert and focused and not letting myself have those lapses in judgment. So for me, that was prioritizing getting really good sleep, especially before tournaments, constantly exercising, because I think that keeps me in a better mental state and just kind of more constantly zoned in, eating better, all these things that aren't as related to my Flesh and Blood prep, but I think still impacts tournaments. And I think that I did a much better job of that this year than I did last year in 2022. But the fact that I got to the World Championship in 2023, and then it just so happened to be draft in the same round, but that was kind of like, for me, that was kind of like a poetic like wake-up call. The fact that I got there a full year later and had the exact same thing happened meant I hadn't been prioritizing those things high enough. That's something that I think I really felt a shift in me at Worlds this year when I lost that round to a punt. I was like, I am not going to get to Worlds next year and lose round 9 to a silly mistake. Basically just exercise, sleep, food, keeping myself in great physical condition so that I can perform well mentally is just my absolute number one priority for next year. And I just am not going to, I'm not going to make any excuses with that. I feel like it really does affect my tournament performance. So I am going to put a big priority on it. And that's like one of the number one moments I can single out from this year that really shaped how I'm going to go into next year.
Yeah, we can't talk about all the moments where you learned, but I think it's really nice that you can highlight this one moment that is so shaping for you in this year, because in the beginning you were telling us like you played 61 tournaments and you were winning 18 of those. And it's really important to see like it's not only your successes that really shape you, but rather all the failures and all the mistakes that you make, and then making it in the next tournament and trying to facilitate what this mistake really was, and then leveraging off on the experience.
Yeah, 100%. I try to do this constantly. Basically, after every tournament, even if I win the tournament, I look back at any losses I had and try to identify like the main thing that went wrong in that loss, or if there are multiple things, what they are. And normally I can point to something. That's one of my favorite things about Flesh and Blood, is that in almost every loss, if you dig deep enough, you can find something you did wrong. Whether it was a very silly mistake, like I just talked about, where like my physical mental state was not tuned in enough that I made a punt, or I built my deck wrong and like devoted a sideboard slot to a matchup that wasn't as important as this one, and I lost for that reason, or like I didn't understand something critical about the way the matchup plays out, so I made a mistake early. I feel like I can always identify something that like I probably could have been doing better in that game. And very occasionally you get games where that's not the case and there really is nothing you could do better. But the cool thing about Flesh and Blood is I think that that's a very small percentage of the time where you really couldn't have done anything better. But sometimes it does take some digging and pondering to figure out what it is you could have improved.
Yeah, that's a really important part to talk about, I think, because many games are different. Flesh and Blood is not really like these games where you pop off one time and then the game is over, but rather it's a slow and steady win over time when you dig through your different hands that you draw throughout the game. We already talked a lot about this year, which experiences you had and what kind of tournaments you played in. If any viewer have still specific questions about this year, drop them in the comments, because now we will actually talk about your plan for 2024.
Yeah, let's do it.
Before we jump into the questions, is there anything you want to start with here when talking about your plan for 2024?
Well, I really want to prioritize limited. Like I mentioned earlier, that was a big takeaway for me from US Nats. And I also really want to prioritize sleep and exercise and getting myself in a really good physical state so that I can have a good mental state. And those two things from Nats and Worlds this year are going to be at the forefront of my mind going into next year. So I don't have a super concrete plan because it's going to depend on like different split formats and stuff, and I'm going to adapt as I go. But those are two things that are really going to guide my choices for how I spend my time next year.
Yeah, I think like even having a plan to start with is pretty important. At least when you are a player that really wants to play at the Pro Tour, at the World Championship, or even at a calling, because you have a way building up to this tournament. Even like the Pro Tour, you need to play at the Pro Quest and see if you can qualify for the Pro Tour, then book the flights and stuff like that. You talked about something really important for you already, but now let's talk about what are you actually aiming to achieve in the next year?
I would like to reach a point where I never make silly, unforced mistakes, like the one I just mentioned that I made in Worlds this year. I think that in reality, those things can easily happen to everyone, but I really put so much time into this game and care so much about improving as a player. And I feel like there are so many mistakes that can happen from lack of experience with a matchup, or maybe a deck building mistake, or even an incorrect hero choice. And especially in limited different things where you're just not familiar enough with the situation, or you don't know, the correct draft pick to take in a really hard spot. There are so many mistakes that get made from lack of experience or lack of enough testing, and like you're going to learn from them. And I'll call those real mistakes. I don't want any fake mistakes where I had enough knowledge to make the correct choice for sure, but I just made the wrong choice for some silly reason. Like basically it was just a brain fart. Those are frustrating for me because I put so much time in and work in to try to work on the real mistakes, and the fake mistakes feel like they kind of happen for no reason. And like I said, in my mind, the thing that I can do to eliminate those as much as possible is prioritize sleep, exercise, food. And so I am prioritizing those things as number one focus this year. And if I can get to the end of 2024 and say that I never made a complete punt, that would make me really happy.
So how are you tackling then to achieve this goal? You said you want to really prioritize your mental state, your sleep, getting good food in, and what is actually like a few steps that you can share with us, the viewers and myself, that you are aiming for to achieve the goal with?
I think for me personally, I am trying to go for a run every day, just like here at home. I've started running. I also play tennis, which is added exercise and just like doing push-ups and different workout stuff. But my number one thing is just I want to go for a run every day. And even when I'm out of town, I'm trying to find ways to like a spot to go for a run, or different ways to just get some exercise in, just stay active. For me, I feel like that helps a lot. And then also just prioritizing sleeping enough every day and also sleeping at the same time. I know that because of jet lag, that's not always possible, but I've had plenty of nights this year where I don't get the full amount of sleep that I normally need, and I still function fine, but I think that slowly starts to kind of eat away at my ability to stay super sharp and can affect my tournament performance a bit. I just am going to stop sacrificing sleep so much and make it a priority to get the full, however many hours it is. It's different for different people in different age groups, but get like the full amount of sleep every night. And except for jet lag where I can't, try to sleep at the same time every day, because I think that makes a difference as well.
Yeah, for sure. I can totally relate to this. I know that not every player has this on their radar, and so I think it's really amazing that you are talking now about this and letting other viewers who are on this video know that you are actually actively trying to avoid these kind of things happen, but then also work your way towards a better state when being at the tournament, but also for yourself in other situations. Let's come to a little bit more of the technical side in Flesh and Blood for next year, because there are some really amazing tournaments ahead of us. And what are the ones that you are actually planning to participate in?
My short answer is I want to play everything. My goal is to travel to as many callings and battle hardens as I possibly can, and then of course prioritize making it to every major. I will absolutely be at both Pro Tours, US Nats, and Worlds. I would really like to make it to every calling possible. The only exception is, of course, if one overlaps, like if there are two callings going on at once, I can't do that. But every weekend where there's a calling going on and there's not something else going on, I want to be there. And then battle hardens, I'm still deciding how far I'm willing to travel for a battle harden. This year, my rule was anywhere in the United States, I'll go. Definitely anywhere in North America next year, I'm willing to go for a battle harden. And then maybe even farther than that, depending on just like what the travel looks like. But I really would like to be playing tournaments as often as possible. As exhausting as it is, there's just nothing more fun to me. I want to play them all.
It sounds amazing, and I think that's like the astonishing part about following your career around, that this is possible, and you are not only making it possible, but you are doing it in a way that you try to do it as healthy as possible. And I know from talking to other pro players that this is the trap that a lot of players that are like yourself, playing at the high stakes, earning money with this game, and winning is also like kind of a dopamine kick, right? Let's be honest. It's something that you need to be aware of and that you need to learn how to tackle. So how are you staying ahead of getting lost in the money and the fame?
I think that for me, the really easy answer to that is just, I love the game. I absolutely love the competition and winning feels really good. But even if I don't win a tournament, if I am happy with my play, especially if I learned some things and I had like good interactions with people, I'm thrilled with that weekend. I really just love playing Flesh and Blood. Every game I play makes me happy. And I think that is a really easy way for me to kind of stay down to earth with it all. Like I just am there because I love playing, and chasing the titles and the prizes is all just like a byproduct of the fact that I love the game so much and I'm willing to spend time on it. But really, like, what I love more than anything is just the actual act of playing Flesh and Blood. It's not just winning tournaments. So I think that I just want to play more. It is definitely easy to get caught up in the stakes of it all, especially at the high level, like playing for big prizes, big glory. But I think just like focusing on the game, it's the same thing I say about like how I keep myself under control when I'm playing at high stakes, and then just like also I guess why the stakes are not the focus for me. The game is fundamentally just such a good game, and there's so much to learn constantly. I feel like every day I spend playing it, I like answer some questions and figure out some more questions that I still need to answer. And that's part of why I devote so much time to it. I feel like there's like infinitely more to figure out. So yeah, I just love Flesh and Blood.
Amazing. This is definitely not possible for that many players around the whole world. And so what would you say if you needed to limit yourself to a few tournaments? How would you try to prioritize the tournaments that you want to go to, but also how to stay ahead of those negative feelings that maybe come with it when you want to attend everything, but you really can't?
I think that depending on what your priorities are and where you're at in your Flesh and Blood career, I think prioritizing your own country's nationals and whatever the biggest majors are that you can reasonably make it to is a good goal to give yourself kind of these pinnacles of the year to look forward to. Like, I know that makes my year a lot more exciting. Basically every couple of months we kind of enter a new season where it's like, oh, Nats is coming up, or now Worlds is coming up. And that's really exciting. And there's kind of like an anticipation that builds with that. And then like in my local scene, we had a calling this year. So there was like the lead up to calling Dallas, and even battle hardens locally kind of get that same vibe. So whatever level of event it is for you, just prioritize picking out at least a couple really big events in the year that you can look forward to as kind of like the pinnacle of your competition. And then I think it varies for each person, but I definitely feel the disappointment that can come with not making it to some events. I'm so happy and so fortunate that I'm able to go to as many as I'm able to. And even then, in the last 2 years, I've had events that I've had to miss. And it's a sad feeling to have to stay at home or wherever, maybe somewhere else you're obligated to be that weekend or whatever. And everyone else is getting to go play this event and you're not able to make it that time. It's a sad feeling, but I think just since we can't always play them all, just get the maximum enjoyment out of the ones you do go to. Prepare for those, depending on how competitive you are or what your goals are. Just focus all that energy into having the absolute best blast you can at the weekends you can show up for, if there's nothing you can do to change the ones you can't.
I think it's also really important to come to a core point that you are talking about, and that is like being at peace with what you have, right? With your capabilities and with the possibilities that you have. And in the next year, we see a real big rise in actually the amounts of Flesh and Blood tournaments that are being held around the world. So that is good news for everyone that is watching and that it wants to play in the next year. Because even though maybe you can't travel all around the world and attend all the big events, but maybe there are a few more local events nearby you, so you can then see and look into the dates if they are fitting your schedule. Let's close out your plan for 2024 with a question that I'm really curious to hear your answer to now, because I'm a huge fan of the team you are on, the Wolfpack. I love you all. It's like, it has been so amazing to follow the team around this year and even being able to spend the whole weekend at the Proto Baltimore with you guys. But tell me more about the team and how its role is affecting you in your plans for 2024.
Yeah, so a huge portion of the time I spend playing Fab is with the Wolfpack. They're absolutely critical to my tournament preparation. And it's really nice to have a big team of people who play a variety of heroes. And in a given season, usually we all have one or maybe a couple decks we're considering for an event. And then you just find someone who is playing a deck you need a matchup into, find a time to jam with them, and play some games. And hopefully there are enough of us that often every kind of top deck in the metagame is being played by at least one person on the team. That's not always true. So sometimes we will like trade reps where, let's say, a teammate and I are both planning to bring Lexi to an event, and we both need reps into Oldhim, and no one on the team is playing Oldhim, which in reality would never be true with Oldhim. But for the sake of just in theory, then we'll both take turns playing Oldhim into each other so we can get the reps we need. And then also, especially with draft, I find collaborating with the team is super helpful. We do some in-house drafting where we actually draft with each other, but I think we try to be conscious of the fact that doing that too much can be less productive than finding other groups to draft with, because if you draft with the same people too much, you can get what people refer to kind of as inbred testing, where a hero is overdrafted or certain cards are like prioritized differently than they would be. And even if the way that we're drafting we think is quote unquote correct, it's still not necessarily reflective of what we're going to see at the major. So we're going to get like a false idea of which cards are being prioritized highly by the vast majority of players. And sometimes we will get too deep into thinking an idea is correct and we never find out that it's not, because no one in our team is trying something else. So for all of those reasons, it can be really helpful to draft with people outside of just the team. But discussing limited is something that the Wolfpack does a lot, and I find that extremely helpful, just talking about the draft process, what we think the different matchups play like, and like what the game plans are, the different ways you can draft each hero, because often there are kind of multiple archetypes. Even just like whether to go first, second, we have big team discussions and try to figure all these things out. And I find that extremely helpful, just having a group of people who are also dedicated to trying to figure out the format. You get so much farther than you would just by yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting that you mention it too, like the brewing thing inside of the team, because a big part does not only play the team itself, but also the people that are edging on the team, right? So those people who are interacting with the team, but that are not actually part of the wolf pack, but rather testing partners, friends, other players from your locals or online that you are interacting with.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of teams in this game, but in general, like, collaboration is usually just mutually beneficial, even outside of teams, especially with draft and stuff like that. Just like, I love hearing different people's opinions on different parts of the game and like talking about things that, especially like things that we disagree on, even like just, oh, like, I was thinking this, why do you have this opinion? With as many people as possible, I think it's just helpful for everyone to get different thoughts because the game really is so deep, it's hard to explore everything.
Definitely. It is possible, though, to explore the tournaments that are available for the next year. And a lot of players are looking at the list of tournaments available and think like, how can I make it to the next level? Maybe a viewer wants to get to the national championship. Maybe another one wants to get to the pro tour. And another one maybe even just wants to get one win at the calling, like myself. So how would you tell those players that they can get to the next level in the next year, 2024?
I think one thing to start off focusing on is how you want to spend your time. Because the first thing you have to decide as a player is kind of how many heroes you're willing to play. I try to always play what I think is the best deck, or like the deck that I think has the highest chance to win the tournament. And I will spend a lot of time every week to learn the new hero that I'm going to play that weekend, or in my off time, learn different heroes that I think could end up being good in the coming months to try to prepare for that. And I do a lot of kind of hopping around different decks. But the reality is, not everyone has enough time to try to play every hero. And so maybe you want to just play a couple heroes and you switch between them depending on what the current meta looks like. Or maybe you're just a specialist and you focus completely on one hero or one class, and that's all you play. We've seen some specialists have extreme levels of success. Like, I think one of the best examples from this year is Mara playing Dromai, has done really well throughout the year, got second at Pro Tour Baltimore. I think any of these things can work, but I think you have to analyze how much time you have available and then decide what the best use of that time is. And one thing I will say is, even if you're not planning to ever take a deck to a tournament, I think it can still be really helpful to pick up other heroes just for a couple games to feel how they play. For example, let's say you are a Dromai main and you're planning to only play Dromai, at least for the rest of this year, and you have been struggling in your Bravo matchup, for example. I think that, especially once you've played a matchup a couple times, it can become more helpful to play the Bravo side of it, like see how it feels to play Bravo into Dromai. And this can apply to any matchup, I'm just saying hero names. But whether you can borrow a deck from someone else who has Bravo or even play digitally, I think just getting a couple reps on all the heroes you don't play can be immensely helpful for when you get matched against them in a tournament, understanding what's going on the other side of the table. And then the last suggestion for people who are really trying to up their Flesh and Blood game is to seek out others who are as dedicated as you, and ideally people whose strengths are your weaknesses. If you can combine forces with people who are good at what you're bad at, and you can help them with the things they're bad at, and that's like what comes naturally to you, you get stronger as a team. And also, just kind of like I was talking about before with the Wolf Pack and also collaborating outside of it, there are so many things to figure out in this game, infinite ground to cover, and it is pretty much impossible to do it even as a group, but especially by yourself. It's impossible to learn everything that there is to learn. So you could basically multiply your progress by working with other people who are exploring questions other than the ones you are, and then you meet back up and discuss the answers you found. So yeah, I think just like whether it's forming a local team or just talking to other players who you know or online, whatever, just try to collaborate with people and get different opinions.
So if any of the viewers wants to share their goals or their plans for the next year, write them down in the comments. I'm really curious to read them, and maybe we can talk about it in more detail then in the comments. But there's also another group of players that are starting out in the next year, or maybe like myself, like I want to play more locally and try to get traction at my armory. What do you say to those kind of people that are beginning to compete in 2024?
I think if you're just starting off, similar to players who are already enfranchised but are trying to level up, it is really helpful to just seek out people who know more than you. And whether it's at your local scene or wherever you can find players, just try to get games against people who have more experience than you and learn from them. Ask questions. When I first started, I showed up to for me, it was the Dallas, Texas area. I just showed up to my local armories and I asked a bunch of questions to all the players who had been there for a while about various things, what heroes were the best, what different matchups looked like, just random things like how I should be prioritizing arsenaling. Like, do games normally go to second cycle? Like, I've been told that a lot of Fab games go to second cycle, but at this time period, Cheerios Briar was really popular and the format was generally more aggressive. And I was like, my games haven't been going to second cycle. And just getting some advice from players who had been playing longer than me was really helpful with all these various questions that come up in Flesh and Blood. So just talk to other people. I think there's a lot of content out there on YouTube, different people making tier lists and deck guides and various videos like this one just to try to elevate your game. So if you're just starting off, but you're really trying to improve, I think seeking out stuff like that can be really helpful. That's another thing I did, especially early on. I watched all kinds of content just to get different creators' ideas on like the things that you should be prioritizing as a new player, and then also just advice on how to play certain decks. And finally, just practice, spend a lot of time playing. Even if you don't have that much time to play, try to maximize the time you do have. I know not everyone is as competitively minded, so if you're trying to learn a lot about how the game works, but you're more casual focused, that's completely fine too. If you have big competitive aspirations, try to really analyze how you're spending your time and maximize it. Because like I've mentioned, even for me, I've played the game for 2 years and I spend about as much time on Flesh and Blood as I would spend on like a full-time job. And even then, I feel like there's infinitely more ground to cover and things I can keep improving. Just from the get-go, trying to spend your time as efficiently as possible, I think really pays off later. And final piece of advice for any Flesh and Blood player is have fun. Like I said, I feel like when I focus on doing this, I not only have a better time, but I really perform better. Don't get too caught up in your desires to win a certain event or make a certain amount of progress. I think it's great to have goals, but I think really just focusing on the enjoyment of the game allows you to play better and focus better. And that's the number one piece of advice I would give to myself starting off.
Perfect. Thank you so much. These were so aspirational and inspirational words for those players that are watching, for myself too, going into the next year. I'm really thankful that you are sharing all these experiences with us, letting us into your review for this year and then also into the plans for next year. Is there anything you want to say at the end here to close this off?
Just, I love Flesh and Blood and I love the Flesh and Blood community. I think it's the greatest community I've been a part of. So I look forward to seeing everyone around the world at events next year. And I hope everyone has a fantastic 2024.
You have the best year in 2024 too, Brodie. Thank you so much for taking the time today, and we see us in the next year.
Bye, Alex. Thanks for having me on.